English Bridge Podcast.
From your favorite healing space.
You can be surrounded by millions of people and still feel completely invisible. That's not irony, Cheryl. That's the loneliness paradox of modern cities.
I had a student in Shanghai who told me she felt lonelier there than in her tiny hometown. She said at least back home when she felt sad, someone noticed.
And that's the thing nobody warns you about when you move to a big city. The crowd doesn't cure loneliness. Sometimes it makes it worse.
Welcome back to English Bridge. I'm Cheryl, and I spent 3 years teaching English in Asia, and I saw this pattern over and over. Students would arrive in these massive cities full of excitement, and within 6 months, they'd tell me they'd never felt more alone.
And I'm Noah. When I was counseling, I had clients living in apartments with paper-thin walls, hearing their neighbors every single day. But they hadn't had a real conversation with another human in weeks. The proximity made the isolation feel even sharper.
For me, it hit hardest during my second year in Shanghai. I'd walk through crowds of thousands at the subway station, and I realized I could disappear and nobody would notice. That feeling stuck with me for months.
From a psychological standpoint, what you experienced is called social isolation in the presence of others. Your brain registers all these people as potential connections, but when none of them materialize, it creates this cognitive dissonance that's actually painful.
So you're saying my brain saw all those people and thought connection is possible here, but when it didn't happen, that gap between expectation and reality hurt more than just being physically alone?
Exactly. And today we're going to unpack why cities' places designed to bring people together can become echo chambers of loneliness. We'll look at what's happening in your brain, why this affects some people more than others, and what actually works to break the pattern.
Because I think a lot of our listeners are living this right now, Noah. They're in London, New York, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, surrounded by people but feeling completely disconnected. And they think something's wrong with them.
Nothing's wrong with them. The structure of urban life creates conditions that make genuine connection harder, and most people don't realize they're fighting against invisible barriers. Understanding those barriers is the first step.
So if you're listening to this on your commute or in your apartment where you can hear your neighbors but don't know their names, this episode is for you. We're going to make sense of this feeling.
And we're going to start by painting the picture. Before we analyze why this happens, let's just describe what it feels like. Because I think when people hear these scenarios, they're going to realize they're not alone in feeling alone.
Let's walk through it, Noah. What does this loneliness actually look like in daily life?
Picture this. You riding the subway during rush hour, pressed shoulder to shoulder with 50 other people. You can smell someone's coffee, feel another person's backpack against your arm. But every single person is staring at their phone, and you realize you could start crying right now, and nobody would look up.
Oh, I've been that person, Noah. I remember one morning in Shanghai, I was having the worst day, just got some bad news from home, and I was standing in this packed train car with tears running down my face. Not one person made eye contact.
And the worst part is, you're not even angry at them. You understand, because you've done the same thing. You've trained yourself not to see the people around you, because engaging feels risky or exhausting.
And then you start thinking, what if I actually needed help? What if this was an emergency? The people are right there, but the distance feels infinite.
That's when the loneliness shifts from circumstantial to existential. You're not just alone in that moment. You're realizing the structure of your entire daily life is built around avoiding connection with the people physically closest to you.
It's like living in a crowd of strangers who've all agreed to pretend the others don't exist. And once you notice that pattern, you can't unsee it. Okay, here's another one that gets me.
You move to a new city for work or school. Everyone tells you it's such a great place to meet people, so much happening. And technically, they're right. There are events, meetups, bars, clubs. But after work, you're so drained that the idea of going out and being on for strangers feels impossible.
Yes. I had a student, David, who moved to Beijing for a tech job. He'd see all these WeChat groups organizing Friday night meetups, and he'd think, I should go, I need friends. But by Friday, he'd been performing all week at work, and the thought of small talk with strangers made him want to hide.
So he'd stay home, scroll through social media seeing other people out having fun, and feel worse. The opportunity for connection was there, but accessing it required energy he didn't have. That's the cruel paradox.
And then Sunday would come, and he'd feel guilty for wasting his weekend alone. Like, I live in one of the most exciting cities in the world. Why am I sitting in my apartment?
Because your nervous system needed rest more than it needed stimulation. But the city doesn't validate that need. The city's message is always more, faster, louder. Resting feels like failure.
So you end up lonely because you're too tired to not be lonely. And that cycle just keeps feeding itself. Here's one that really messed with me when I was abroad.
You're walking through your neighborhood, the same route you take every day. You see the same coffee shop owner, the same security guard at your building, the same person walking their dog. These people are part of your daily landscape, but you've never spoken to them beyond basic politeness.
And part of you wants to, right? Like, I used to see this grandmother at the park near my apartment every morning. I'd smile, she'd nod. 6 months of this, but neither of us ever said more than good morning.
And you don't know why. There's no obvious barrier. You both speak the language. You're both there at the same time every day. But there's this invisible wall that feels too awkward to cross after a certain point.
I think about her sometimes, Noah. I wonder if she was lonely too. Maybe we could have been friends. But the script for how city people interact doesn't include that kind of spontaneous connection.
The city teaches you that proximity doesn't equal permission. You can exist in someone's daily orbit for years without it ever becoming a relationship, and each day that passes makes the gap harder to bridge.
So you end up surrounded by almost connections. People who could be friends, but the moment never comes. That one hurts. What else are we missing?
Here's a big one. You finally make plans with someone, a coworker, an acquaintance, doesn't matter. You're excited. You pick a date 2 weeks out, but as the day gets closer, you start hoping they'll cancel.
Oh no, I've absolutely done this. You're not excited anymore, you're just tired. And you're thinking, I could use that evening to do laundry and go to bed early.
So you show up and you have a fine time. It's not bad, but the whole time, part of your brain is calculating when you can politely leave, and afterward, you feel guilty because you know you should be grateful for connection, but mostly, you just feel relieved it's over.
And then you don't make plans again for another month because the idea of scheduling feels like adding another obligation to an already overwhelming list. So the loneliness continues, but now it's self-imposed.
Exactly. The city trains you to see connection as a task rather than a refuge. It becomes something else you have to manage and schedule, not something that naturally replenishes you.
So you end up isolating yourself to protect your energy, but the isolation drains you in a different way. Man, Noah, this is depressing. Last scenario?
Last one. You're lying in bed on a Saturday morning. You have no obligations. Theoretically, this is freedom. But instead of feeling relaxed, you feel anxious. Because you know you should be doing something, exploring the city, being productive, making the most of your time here.
I didn't move to this amazing city to waste weekends in bed. Guilt. I know that one intimately.
So you scroll through options. Museums, markets, parks, everything sounds simultaneously appealing and exhausting. You can't decide. An hour passes, then 2, and now you've wasted the morning, which makes you feel worse, so you just stay in bed.
And by evening, you've barely left your apartment, barely spoken to anyone, and you feel lonelier than if you just admitted from the start that you needed a quiet day. The freedom became a trap.
Because the city sells you one infinite possibility, but your brain can't process infinite options. So you freeze. And the loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about feeling like you're failing at the very thing you moved to the city to experience.
Okay, so we've painted the picture, and honestly, Noah, I think anyone listening in a big city just felt very seen. But now I need to understand why this happens. Like, what's going on in our brains that makes city life so isolating?
Let's start with the most fundamental piece. Your brain uses about 20% of your body's total energy, and a huge chunk of that goes to processing social information. In a city, you're exposed to hundreds or thousands of faces every single day. Your brain has to constantly make micro-decisions, threat or not threat, engage or ignore.
So you're saying that just walking down a busy street is actually exhausting my brain even if I'm not consciously thinking about it?
Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. There's something called the Zeigarnik effect. Your brain gives more attention to incomplete tasks than completed ones. Every person you pass is a potential social interaction that your brain registers as incomplete. You didn't connect, but you could have.
Wait, so that random guy I made eye contact with on the subway this morning, my brain is still holding on to that as unfinished business?
In a way, yes. Your brain evolved in small communities where every face was either known or needed to be assessed carefully. It's not designed for this volume of incomplete social possibilities, so it's constantly running background processes that drain you.
That's wild, Noah. So I'm not just tired from work or commuting, I'm tired from all the connections my brain wanted to make but didn't. No wonder people come home and just collapse.
And this leads directly into the second cause: emotional labor. Most people think emotional labor is just customer service work, like forcing a smile when someone's being difficult. But it's actually much broader than that.
Okay, so what counts as emotional labor in a city context? Because I don't work in customer service, but I definitely feel emotionally drained after a day out in the city.
Think about every time you adjusted your facial expression on public transit so you didn't look threatening or vulnerable. Every time you performed politeness with a stranger when you felt irritated. Every time you suppressed your actual emotional state to fit the social script of the situation.
Oh, so like when I'm having a terrible day, but I still have to make small talk with the barista, and I put on this whole "I'm fine, thanks for asking" performance? That's emotional labor?
Exactly. And your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for self-regulation, is working overtime to manage that gap between what you feel and what you display. That's cognitively expensive, and most people don't realize they're doing it constantly.
And here's what gets me about that, Noah. Nobody sees that work. Like, at the end of the day, you're exhausted, but you can't point to anything concrete you did. You just existed in public, but it cost you everything.
Which is why people often feel lonelier in cities than in smaller communities. In a small town, you can show up as yourself, tired, grumpy, whatever. People know you. But in a city, every interaction is a performance. For strangers, we're also performing. Nobody's actually meeting each other.
So we're all wearing masks and then wondering why we feel disconnected. That makes so much sense. But Noah, I'm curious about something. I felt this way more intensely when I was teaching in Asia than I did back home in the States. Is there a cultural piece to this?
Absolutely. In collectivist cultures, a lot of Asian societies, parts of Latin America, the Middle East, there's often a stronger emphasis on social harmony and not burdening others with your problems. So the emotional labor compounds because you're managing not just your own emotions, but your responsibility to the group's comfort.
So you're exhausted, not from what you did, but from what you didn't say. Like all the things you held back to keep the peace or avoid inconveniencing someone?
Precisely. And even in individualist cultures like the US or UK, cities create this weird middle ground. You're surrounded by people, so the social norms activate, but you don't have the deep relationships where vulnerability is safe. You're stuck performing surface-level politeness without access to genuine intimacy.
That's such a specific kind of trap. You can't be real because nobody knows you, but you can't get to know people without being real first. How does anyone break out of that?
That's what we'll get to. But first, there's one more cause we need to talk about: decision fatigue. Every day in a city, you're making hundreds of tiny decisions. Which subway car to enter, which coffee shop to try, which route to walk, where to eat lunch.
Okay, but those seem like small decisions, Noah. How much energy can that really take?
Individually, not much, but your brain uses the same neurological resources for small decisions as it does for big ones. By the evening, your willpower is depleted, so when you have free time, the moment you could actually pursue connection, you're too mentally exhausted to choose anything.
Is that why I sometimes spend 30 minutes scrolling Netflix and then just give up and go to bed without watching anything? I literally can't decide what I want because I've used up all my decision-making energy during the day?
Exactly. And this is especially brutal for connection, because meaningful relationships require initiative. You have to decide to text someone, choose a place to meet, figure out timing. When you're already depleted, the easiest choice is always do nothing.
So the loneliness isn't because people don't want connection. It's because by the time they have the opportunity for it, they're too drained to make it happen. That reframes everything, Noah. And I think it's time we heard some real stories about this.
Let me tell you about Maria. She was 28, worked in finance in London, came to see me because she said she felt empty. She'd moved there from Portugal 3 years earlier, and at first, everything was exciting. But by the time she reached out, she was going days without a real conversation.
Days? But she worked in an office, right? She was around people all day.
Sure, but think about what those interactions actually were. Client calls where she had to be professional and polished. Meetings where she managed her boss's expectations. Lunch breaks where she was too tired to do more than scroll her phone. She was surrounded by people but never actually seen by them.
So what was her specific mistake, Noah? Like, what was the thing she kept doing that locked her in this pattern?
She kept waiting for someone else to initiate. She'd think, if my coworkers wanted to be friends, they'd invite me out. Or if my neighbors were friendly, they'd say hello first. She put the entire burden of connection on other people, which meant it never happened.
But I get why she did that, though. Reaching out feels vulnerable. What if people say no? What if they think you're weird or desperate?
And that's exactly what held her back. The fear of rejection felt more dangerous than the reality of loneliness. Her brain was choosing the known pain over the unknown risk. It's a protection mechanism, but it becomes a prison.
That breaks my heart, Noah. Did she ever find a way out of it?
Eventually, yes, but it took hitting a breaking point where the loneliness became more painful than the fear. And even then, the shift was tiny. She started saying good morning to her regular barista and actually waiting for a response instead of just grabbing her coffee and leaving.
Such a small thing, but I bet it felt massive to her in the moment. That reminds me of someone I knew when I was teaching in Shanghai. Her name was Lynn, and she was one of my adult students.
I'm curious, what was her situation?
Lynn had just moved to Shanghai from a smaller city for a marketing job, and she told me she felt like she was living in two different worlds. At work, she had to be this polished, professional version of herself, but at home, she was completely isolated because she didn't know anyone in the city yet.
So she was performing all day, then coming home to nothing? That's exactly the emotional labor trap we talked about. How did she describe it?
She said it felt like being an actress who never gets to take off the costume. And the worst part was, she couldn't even explain it to her family back home. They'd say, "But you're in Shanghai, you must be having such an exciting life." And she'd feel guilty for being miserable.
That gap between external perception and internal reality, that's incredibly isolating. What changed for her?
She joined a hiking group, not because she loved hiking, but because it was the only social activity she could find where people didn't expect you to talk the whole time. She could just walk alongside people without the pressure of constant conversation.
That's brilliant, actually. She found a way to be around people without the emotional labor of performing. The connection happened through shared activity, not forced small talk.
And over a few months, she started actually making friends in that group. People she could be quiet with, you know? That felt like real connection to her in a way that work drinks or networking events never did.
The lesson there is that not all connection looks the same. Sometimes the antidote to loneliness isn't deep conversation. It's just being in the presence of people where you don't have to perform. That connects to another client I had, actually. His name was James.
Tell me about James. What was his story?
James was a software developer in his early 30s living in Manchester. He'd been remote working even before the pandemic, so his entire social life was online. He told me he had thousands of followers on Twitter, active Discord servers, friends all over the world, but he felt profoundly lonely.
Wait, but how did you get him to change, Noah? Because just telling someone you need to go outside and meet real people won't work. He obviously knew that already.
Right, so instead of telling him to change everything, I asked him to run a tiny experiment. 1 coffee shop visit per week, same place, same time, no agenda, just sit there with his laptop and work. That's it.
That's it? You didn't make him talk to anyone or join a club or anything?
Nope, because the barrier wasn't that he didn't know what to do. The barrier was that making friends felt like this huge, overwhelming task. But sitting in a coffee shop on Tuesday mornings felt manageable.
And what happened?
After about 6 weeks, the barista started recognizing him. Then another regular started nodding hello. Then one day, someone asked if they could share his table because the place was packed. 3 months in, he had what he called coffee shop acquaintances. Not deep friendships, but people who knew his face and his order.
And that was enough to shift the loneliness?
It took the edge off. He wasn't cured, but he had these tiny moments of recognition in his week. Someone knew he existed in physical space, not just online. That mattered more than he expected.
I love that, Noah. It's not about fixing everything at once. It's about finding one small crack in the isolation and widening it slowly. I had a student who went through something similar, actually. Her name was Yuki, and she was a graphic designer from Japan.
Oh, I feel for her already. Creative fields plus social media, that's a recipe for comparison and isolation.
Exactly. Yuki was constantly looking at other designers' work online, seeing them at these cool events and collaborations, and she felt like everyone was succeeding except her. She lived in Tokyo, surrounded by millions of people. But she told me she felt invisible.
But why didn't she just stop looking at social media, Cheryl? Or reach out to those designers she admired? What kept pulling her back into that pattern?
Fear, mostly. She was afraid that if she reached out, people would see her work and judge it as not good enough, and she was afraid that if she stopped checking social media, she'd miss opportunities or fall even further behind. So she was trapped in the cycle of scrolling and comparing and feeling worse.
That's classic avoidance behavior mixed with social comparison anxiety. Her identity was tied to being a designer, but she wasn't sure she was a good one, so every other designer became a threat to that identity.
And the turning point came when she joined a local design meetup, but not as a designer. She volunteered to help with setup and registration, so she was there in the room with other creatives, but without the pressure of presenting her work or being judged.
That's such a smart reframe. She got the proximity to the community without the performance anxiety. And I'm guessing once she felt safer in that space, the connection started to form naturally?
Exactly. After a few months, people started asking her about her own work because they'd seen her around so much. But by then, she'd already built enough rapport that it didn't feel like a cold judgment. They were asking because they were curious, not because they were evaluating her.
The lesson there is that sometimes you have to enter the community sideways. Not through the front door where everyone's watching, but through a side entrance where you can belong before you have to prove yourself. And that's true for all these stories, Cheryl. The people who broke out of loneliness didn't do it through grand gestures. They did it through tiny, almost invisible shifts.
Which gives me hope, honestly, because I think people hear urban loneliness and they think the only solution is to move away or completely overhaul their life. But these stories show that's not true. Small changes can actually create big shifts over time.
And that brings us to the deeper question. How do you know when you're in trouble? Because loneliness is one of those things that creeps up slowly. You don't wake up one day and suddenly feel isolated. It builds over time, and your brain normalizes it.
So what should people be watching for, Noah? What are the early warning signs that this is becoming a real problem?
Your body will tell you before your mind admits it. Chronic tension in your shoulders and neck, even when you're supposedly relaxing. Shallow breathing throughout the day. Clenching your jaw without realizing it. These are signs that your nervous system is stuck in a low-level stress response.
I used to get tension headaches all the time when I was teaching abroad, Noah. I thought it was just from staring at screens, but now I'm wondering if it was my body processing all that isolation and emotional labor.
Almost certainly, your body keeps the score, as the saying goes. And when you're chronically lonely, your stress hormone cortisol stays elevated. That manifests physically headaches, digestive issues, trouble sleeping, getting sick more often.
So if someone's listening and thinking I'm tired all the time but I'm sleeping enough, that could actually be loneliness showing up as physical exhaustion?
Absolutely. And here's the tricky part: people often think, I'll deal with this properly when I have time. I'll make friends when work calms down. I'll invest in relationships when I'm less busy. But that perfect moment never comes.
Oh, the all rest properly on vacation myth. Except vacation is 4 months away and you're burning out now.
Exactly. And even when vacation comes, you're so depleted that you spend it recovering rather than actually enjoying it. Then you go back to the same patterns and the cycle continues.
So, what's the alternative, Noah? Because you can't just quit your job and dedicate your life to making friends. That's not realistic for most people.
The alternative is understanding the difference between passive rest and active rest. Passive rest is collapsing on the couch and scrolling your phone. It feels like rest because you're not doing anything, but your brain is still processing stimulation. Active rest is doing something that genuinely replenishes you.
Okay, but what does that actually look like, Noah? Give me a real example for someone living in a city who's exhausted after work.
10 minutes in a park with no phone. A 5-minute conversation with a neighbor. Cooking a simple meal instead of ordering delivery. Reading 3 pages of a physical book. These sound small, but they give your nervous system a chance to actually reset instead of just numbing out.
So it's not about the amount of time, it's about the quality of the rest, and whether it's actually letting your brain disengage from performance mode.
Exactly. And this is where micro-experiments come in. You don't need to solve loneliness all at once. You just need to run one tiny experiment this week that breaks your current pattern.
Like James and his coffee shop Tuesdays, or Lynn and her hiking group. They didn't overhaul their entire lives, they just tried one small thing that felt manageable.
Right. And the key is picking something so small that your brain can't justify not doing it. Not join a club and make 5 new friends, but say good morning to one person this week and mean it.
I love that, Noah, because I think the overwhelm is what keeps people stuck. They know they're lonely, they know they should do something, but something feels too big. So they do nothing.
And nothing is a choice too. It's just a choice that keeps you exactly where you are. Micro-experiments give you a way to move without the pressure of immediate transformation.
Okay, so let's get practical, Noah. What are 5 things someone can actually try this week if they're feeling this urban loneliness?
First, do a cognitive load audit. Take 5 minutes tonight and write down every open loop in your brain. The email you need to send, the appointment you need to schedule, the conversation you've been avoiding. Getting it out of your head and onto paper reduces the Zeigarnik effect we talked about earlier.
So you're not solving the problems yet, you're just acknowledging they exist? That actually feels doable. What's second?
Second, schedule nothing time. Put 30 minutes on your calendar this week labeled nothing. Not self-care, not productivity, not catching up on tasks. Literally nothing. Give yourself permission to stare out the window if that's what happens.
I can already hear people saying, I don't have 30 minutes, but honestly, Noah, we all do. We just fill it with scrolling or busy work because actual emptiness feels uncomfortable.
Third, complete one microcycle. Pick the smallest possible task that's been nagging at you and finish it completely. Reply to 1 email. Wash 5 dishes. Fold 1 load of laundry. Your brain will get a tiny hit of completion, which reduces background anxiety.
That's the Zeigarnik effect again, right? Closing one open loop so your brain has less to track. I like that. What's fourth?
Fourth, name the specific type of tired you are. Not just, I'm exhausted, but I'm socially drained, or I'm decision fatigued, or I'm touched out from the crowded subway. When you name it specifically, you can address it specifically.
So, if I know I'm socially drained, I don't try to fix it by going to a party. I fix it by having quiet time alone. That makes so much sense. And fifth?
Fifth, set one boundary this week. Say no to one thing you'd normally force yourself to do out of obligation. Skip one meeting that's not essential. Decline one social invitation that feels like a should instead of a want. Practice protecting your energy.
And notice how none of these are make 10 new friends or completely change your life, Noah. They're all small, specific, and actually doable even when you're already overwhelmed.
The loneliness of living in a crowded city isn't a personal failure. It's a structural problem that requires structural solutions, small, consistent changes to how you move through urban space.
And if this conversation helped you name something you've been feeling but couldn't quite articulate, I want you to know you're not alone in this. Millions of people are navigating this same strange isolation right now.
If this conversation resonated with you, send it to someone who needs to hear it today.
And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got something really good lined up.
I'm Noah.
And I'm Cheryl. See you on the bridge.